Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining us on this week's Tax Rep Network podcast. I'm Eric Green, your host. We have a really special guest on this week, all right? Joining us is Darren Guillot. As most of you who have seen Darren, he speaks at many of our conferences, right? Darren is the current SBSE Deputy Commissioner for Collection and Operations Support. Darren is somebody I met a number of years ago when he was the Director of Field Collection Operations. Darren has been a fantastic friend, a fantastic guest. He is incredibly knowledgeable, all right? He provides executive leadership right now for over 10,000 employees. He directs the design, development, delivery of collection programs and policy in support of comprehensive tax administration. He is very involved in the IRS efforts in detecting and deterring tax fraud. What else can I tell you about Darren? He oversees $2.2 billion of budget with SBSE's mission. And prior to this, Darren has had a number of positions with the IRS, including field collection operations. This is as director of field collection operations. He's been director of enterprise collection strategy, director of appeals field operations, director of the ACA compliance strategy and policy, and Midwest area collection. He began his career as a revenue officer, which you'll hear he will discuss today in the podcast. He holds a bachelor's degree from the University of Holy Cross, is a fellow of the Loyola University Institute of Politics, and was awarded the certificate in public leadership by the Brookings Institute. What makes it even more special that Darren is here is we're going to get very, very busy very, very quickly. There are a lot of taxpayers who are in serious trouble right now. Coronavirus does not seem to be going away anytime soon. Business failures, bankruptcies, I think, are up 49%. Divorces are up, sadly. The tax problems, and it's really going to hit the fan, I think, starting around November. After the October 15th comes and goes, and the government does not come and bail everybody out, you're going to watch a lot of people who are going to be in a lot of trouble. All right. So now is really the time, as I've been saying, to really get your representation practices going. All right. That's the whole point of Tax Rep Network. If you are interested, please come and join us inside Tax Rep Network. There is a special offer in the description below with a discount code. Also, in the description are links to the documents that Darren is going to talk about in the program today. So please go do check that out. I think you'll find it very helpful. And last, I want to thank our sponsors, Tax Help Software, which of course is the software we use to do all of our transcripts, all of our resolution, our offers and compromise. It is the cornerstone of our practice, as well as Call ENQ, which is how we get through to the government in under 3 minutes and help get these cases resolved in one phone call. All right. So with no further ado, please enjoy this week's podcast. All right. So listen, Darren, welcome to the podcast, and thanks for doing this.
Thank you, Eric.
So look, I understand that at the start of 2020, which seems like a long time ago now, at the start of 2020, fiscal year, Small Business Self-Employed Division developed a focus guide, which, by the way, is very helpful. And I'll put a link down so our listeners who have not seen the focus guide can go check that out. But Darren, for those people who don't know about it, one, can you explain what a focus guide is? And provide some insight into sort of what does it mean for SBSE employees and taxpayers?
Hey, thanks, Eric. That's a great place to start. So small business has a strong commitment to putting taxpayers first, even before the law, Taxpayer First Act was passed, but also enforcing the tax laws to ensure that the system's fair. There's a level playing field for everybody. And you can only imagine the balance that takes when you're talking about 20,000 employees. I mean, that's easier said than done. And typically what you see at the agency are program letters. And sometimes they tend, although well-intended, can seem to be to the employees year after year. Well, here they come again with their list of what they want us to do, and it's lengthy and it's wordy. So Eric Hilton, small business commissioner, he came up with the idea of, you know what, let's really abbreviate this thing. What if we could do it on a one-page document, maybe front and back, and just you speak in plain language that everybody understands. It doesn't matter if they're a secretary or an executive or a manager or a field agent or an analyst. Can we make that happen? And so that was the origin of the Focus Guide. It was creating an important foundational tool that we could share that would help maintain that balance. And we got input from across the division. We got feedback also over the years from people like your audience, the tax community. Yep. We limited jargon and we kept it in plain language to ensure everyone understands what we plan to achieve and how we plan to get there. So in essence, the Focus Guide is about what's important to us. And hearing from them ahead of time, what do we all know is important to us? And then as leaders, that Focus Guide helps us share with them, here's what we're going to do, plain English, short sentences, in a believable way for our employees that it doesn't seem like, gobbledygook. Here's how we're going to get there in a way that makes believers, because as leaders, our goal really, if you had to say it in one sentence, my opinion is it's to make believers. Do they really think we care about them and we're going someplace that they want to follow us and go? Because if no one's following you, you're not leading anything, right?
Right.
So considering the topics that we're going to discuss on the podcast today, I hope your audience is going to see real straightforward examples of how we bring that Focus Guide to life. And given the limited time we'll have, I'll just touch on a few areas because it's division wide. It touches everything: collection, exam, fraud, you name it. So one of the key areas in the Focus Guide, and you'll see your audience can see it early on in the document, is taking enforcement every time it's appropriate. It means just that, whether it's a lien, a levy, a seizure, a fraud referral, or a civil fraud penalty, or an audit action, or enforcing a summons. If the facts and behavior take us there, we will always take that action. And we've made that clear to employees. Not consider it, you will take this action every time it's appropriate. And we're ensuring our revenue officers and our revenue agents embrace and master their role as civil investigative and enforcement officers. So we've improved our technical training in areas of fraud, suits, all kinds of suits, and seizures. Our non-filer program has really been reinvigorated, and we're putting special emphasis and new data analytics around addressing non-compliance. You've heard the commissioner talk about being in every community, and that's in the Focus Guide. We are expanding our presence in every community. On the collection side, we're doing it through the revenue officer compliance sweeps, whether they involve straight collection work or they deal with the high-income delinquent filers that you've heard about. The acronym for that is high def, of course. Yep. We were well along prior to the pandemic in planning a program called Hearing All Voices to help taxpayers in underserved communities, especially where there's limited English proficiency. We were redesigning notices. We were standing up a new fraud office, and we were working with industry partners like yourselves to increase the knowledge of what we do and what we need from you. Many of you listening to the podcast also helped us in addressing our new hire classes. And you visited our classes and told them, from the other side of the table, what does tax administration dealing with a tax controversy look like from a practitioner? We also spoke to outside groups that we know have concern with compliance, for instance, Restaurant Association and so forth. This was going great. Prior to mid-year, we were having quite a bit of success, Eric, and moving forward on the goals in that Focus Guide.
Yeah, no, and you've already started going there, Darren, but I agree with you, first of all, 100%. I mean, leadership is, laying out a common goal and getting everyone on board with it. And honestly, look, I've known you a long time. I've known Chuck for 20 years, our commissioner, Chuck Reddig. There are people there that can lead. I am curious what the pandemic has done to that. Because let's be honest, you've had to shift focus. I think pretty unexpectedly. So can you kind of walk us through kind of what kind of a monkey wrench has COVID thrown into this?
Yeah, a timely question. One of the most obvious areas, Eric, was our presence in the field and taking enforcement actions. I was just talking about taking enforcement every time it's appropriate. Well, when it's appropriate has become critical. And every single employee, and I do mean employee, not just the leadership, everybody at the IRS has to really focus on that. When is it appropriate? So we limited our enforcement actions for most of our casework, as you know, until after July the 15th. And we did that in recognition of just plain economic reality, the impact of the virus pandemic on our business taxpayers and individual taxpayers. But that said, a key area of focus is, as your audience can see in the guide, strengthening compliance activities. So if your non-compliance, your behavior was so darned egregious, we took the appropriate enforcement actions, even since March, and continuing. Things like jeopardy seizures, suits for injunctive relief, even referring cases to criminal investigation. And our efforts to develop those high-income delinquent filer cases, it continued over the past 3 months. I'll talk more about that in a moment. This is amazing. We also managed to protect the assessment statutes for trust fund penalties nationwide through, and I do mean tireless efforts of four, F-O-U-R, four really exceptional administrative professionals around the country to ensure the fairness of our tax system to those that pay what they owe. We also redoubled our efforts to secure the government's ability to collect on those past due balances by protecting all of our statutes. That's right, just four of them. And between March of 2020 and June of 2020, those four people coordinated their receipt and control of short ASED, assessment statute expiration date cases, on those trust fund penalties, and they made sure that we protected tens of millions of dollars in trust fund penalties that would have been at stake. And likewise, in the Offering Compromise program, we protected, to our knowledge, every single one of the TIPRA statutes. So we did what we had to do, even in person when it was absolutely necessary, and we managed to do it safely and in accordance with the Centers for Disease Control guidelines. Other vital areas of focus that you see in the guide include putting America's taxpayers first, that's the very first one, and developing our workforce. Taxpayers were given the discretion, as you know, Eric, to defer payments on their installment agreements and their offers in compromise, and we stopped defaulting installment agreements and offers during that period when we didn't get payments. We also stopped sending cases to private collection agencies and even reporting taxpayers who had seriously delinquent accounts to the State Department. So we needed to protect our employees and also the public, the public that we served. So our field activities, including those sweeps I referred to, we paused those until an appropriate time. But there were some exceptions. And those were the enforcement actions I noted. Same things like jeopardy. We did a number of jeopardy seizures. We had ROs go out suited up with masks on and gloves and seized millions in cash in one case. So where behavior really was bad enough and we had to take enforcement action and do it in person, I assure you that we did. But our scheduled efforts for the Hearing All Voices, that had to be temporarily postponed. Those will happen soon this fall. On the positive side, really positive, and I know based on conversations you and I have had about delays, Eric, in dealing with our campuses, during the pandemic, we greatly expanded our flexibility by increasing telework for our campus employees. And we're increasing, for instance, our ACS staff from under 2,000, I think they were around 1,900 in the first quarter, right around the month of November. As of June 30th, 2,889 ACS employees. So in just 2 short months, we went from 5% of our ACS employees being able to telework to 75% of our ACS contact representatives can telework in all of our ACS sites. So despite considerable obstacles, we brought on roughly 1,000 ACS employees and were able to answer more phone calls. The hiring efforts, those have been pretty successful, including virtual onboarding and training, even though we have never, ever done that before. So this should help us to continue to better address the phone volumes that are coming in the months ahead, and we're already starting to see that.
Yeah, no, Darren, I got to tell you a couple things. One, I have noticed we have been able to get through to ACS. We have been able now finally to get powers of attorney back. I mean, the IRS has made, I have to say, monstrous efforts to get back to normal. And for those of us, because we deal with you almost every day, it's noticeable that we are basically back to normal.
Well, yeah, Eric, and you know, your audience is probably wondering, because depending on where you are as you listen to this podcast, your concern about the virus and working with the IRS, it might vary. So we are applying science to this. It's something new. It really hasn't been shared broadly with the public until just the past 7 days or so. So I want to talk about it for just a moment. And it really brings together some things in the focus guide and shows you how it's not just talk. It's not just a page that Eric Hilton, our commissioner, wanted to have out there. The leadership, DeLon and Eric and I, wanted to make sure it wasn't, you know, just a bunch of baloney. It's a real thing. It means something. So an innovative accomplishment that happened that brought three of those focus areas together: maintaining a taxpayer-focused organization, ensuring awareness and collective understanding. Wow. I mean, we came up with that back in October. Who would have thought there'd be a pandemic? And the third one, leveraging technology and data analytics. So how did we bring all that together? We've come a long way the past several years using analytics, and it's playing an important role. But we really had to up our game in a smart way during the pandemic. So our collection planning and analysis group, run by a fellow named Alfredo Valdespino down in Texas, his team developed a really sophisticated new tool that provides statistical, geographical analyses of all of our resources, overlaid our available work in a color-coded map. It's very sophisticated. It's updated on a regular basis, and it was designed to help drive where do you put IRS resources and which cases do you work. But a couple of months ago, one of our senior advisors, Joan Moffa, you've met her, Eric, she came up with this great idea based on something she saw the state of Pennsylvania doing about adding publicly available information about COVID cases that you can get from the CDC, and also stuff available from the Labor Department, unemployment rates by county, to see if we could proactively consider where hardships might be considered. So adding that to the analytical tool that was already being developed. And in less than 2 months, I kid you not, less than 60 days, we got the data, it was added to the new analytical tool, we tested it, and we delivered it to all of our leaders, not just in SBSE. We've shared this with TEGE and LB&I as well, and collection and exam have it as well. All of that important information I just talked about, it's updated every 2 weeks. Now, it doesn't make decisions for us, but prior to making visits in an area or taking enforcement action or considering the frequency that we visit an office, this is really going to help inform our decisions. Yep.
No, it is very impressive. And the truth is, you know, I've been watching, obviously, because of what I do. The IRS is making better and better use of data. I mean, across the whole government, better use of data. But no, it's both from the enforcement sweeps and looking for areas where there's a lack of compliance to identifying non-filers. So it's very cool, but on the other hand, I'm not really surprised. The truth is, I'm always very impressed with what the IRS manages to get done. Just the sheer volume of stuff you need to deal with, everything from filing returns to enforcement to all the other things IRS does, working with other federal agencies as far as money laundering stuff and structuring. And I mean, to be blunt, no one understands numbers and money better than IRS. Special agents from IRS work with every other federal agent, enforcement agency. So it's impressive. It's not surprising to me, but it will probably be surprising to some of the listeners. Darren, I don't want to get too far afield, but I do want to talk about, there was an announcement about a new fraud office, the Office of Fraud Enforcement. But, from my perspective, the IRS has always, or at least as far as I can remember, and I've been practicing since the 90s, has always been involved in, helping to stop fraud. We've had fraud technical advisors working in the civil area, helping them develop fraud cases. Obviously, special agents have been around since, I think it's 1916 or 1913. So can you tell us what's new about the Office of Fraud Enforcement?
Yeah, I've got a lot to say about that. So, Eric, so obviously part of our mission, right, is enforcing the tax laws with fairness to all. And that means something really special to us in the civil. You just referred to special agents, but in the civil investigative and civil enforcement role of the IRS, that's important because the great majority of all the enforcement and all the investigative actions done by the IRS, they're actually civil, not criminal. And what's the intent? The intent is to gain compliance, to deter non-compliance, and to ensure that that system is fair for all taxpayers, most especially for those who comply without us having to take enforcement, whether it's civil or criminal. So earlier this year, we updated the National Fraud Office. It's been around for a while and done a great job, but we updated it as the Office of Fraud Enforcement. It's part of small business. That's where it's housed, but its role is to support all of the civil investigative and enforcement functions of the IRS, and support them in detecting and developing civil and criminal fraud cases. So that includes wage and investment, small business, LB&I, and tax-exempt government entities. What's different is it's now led by a member of the Senior Executive Service, Damon Rowe, who you might be familiar with, and some of your audience as well. Damon was an executive in criminal investigation running their international programs, a really sharp gentleman, and he has really hit the ground running since he reported. Also, what's new? It has its own dedicated, the Office of Fraud Enforcement has its own dedicated support of fraud counsel led by Carolyn Schenk, and she's got a team of attorneys helping her as well as embedded special teams of analysts and, of course, the fraud enforcement advisors. And in less than 3 months, just to go a little further talking about them, they went from stand-up, we're talking about March, so just a little over 3 months, went from standing up to thriving. And what do I mean by that? They have really been the avant-garde in stopping COVID fraud by employers. The moment they stood up and reported, one of the first things they had to do is figure out, okay, this is happening real time. We've got to push credits out to help businesses. Where is this an opportunity for criminals to try and steal money from us, and can we stop it before it happens? Also, they have been a key player in the high-income non-filer efforts and helping us realize a very effective year in addressing fraud, despite the pandemic and the office closures. If you could look at our data,
yep.
Insofar as how many fraud cases were referred from the civil functions accepted by CI last year, and how many this year at the end of June, the latest data I have, it's almost the same, Eric. I mean, it's off by less than a handful of cases. So fewer people, office closes, but we actually have maintained a very effective fraud program, including going into a whole brand new area, which is COVID fraud, in 3 months. I am so proud of them. I really, really am. What else is new? So those fraud advisors, they're going to act as cross-functional liaisons for the development, not only of fraud referrals, but civil fraud penalties. They are each subject matter experts, and we've given them more tools than they have ever had before. It's important for your audience to remember what I'm about to share with them as you represent your clients. We've gained access to virtual currency detection analytics, and we're going to be sharing this new tool with collection and exam across the IRS and training them in how to use it. It helps us know that you have virtual currency. So it's important, if you represent a client, whether it's exam or collection, ask them if they have virtual currency. as it becomes a factor, if it becomes a factor in working with our civil enforcement officers, whether it's revenue officers or revenue agents, tell the truth, because before we're talking to you, we probably know you have it. The fraud advisors are going to remain engaged with the cases also after they're sent to CI, including trial assistance. Insofar as the fraud streams, they now have an embedded emerging issues team. We're already doing this. So they're providing fraud expertise and assistance. I'll just give you a taste of some of the emerging areas they're working on already right now. So I just mentioned COVID-19. I'll say a little bit more about that. We actually have people out there promoting getting this tax credit, even if you're not really a business. So we're on to that. And the Office of Fraud Enforcement is on to that. And making sure that those cases are shared with criminal investigation. We're also making sure that people who are getting those credits through the Form 7200 really deserve it. So we're stopping the money from going out before it leaves the door. They're involved in the conservation easement fraud. They're involved in the marijuana industry fraud, whether it's an exam case or a collection case. They're very involved, heavily involved in the high income non-filer world. So the high def or high income delinquent filer sweeps that we did back in February, we identified a large number of employees of taxpayers, that had high incomes, but they didn't file. They didn't file for years. And the Office of Fraud Enforcement is now taking the next step with a significant number of those cases where there are badges of fraud. And we're getting those cases over to criminal investigation or to exam, potentially for civil fraud penalties or further audit. And you will start to see that happen in the weeks ahead. So I don't mean months, weeks ahead. So you'll be seeing those this fiscal year. And that's an amazing thing for something that just started back in December as a concept, and planning and execution started in February. Virtual currency. The emerging threats team, they're on top of that. I just explained that. Here's a new one, especially important for those of you who represent collection taxpayers on offers in compromise. The Office of Fraud Enforcement is currently matching FATCA data against offers in compromise we've accepted. Let me say that again. We are matching FATCA data against offers in compromise that have been accepted. And we are finding taxpayers, yes, we are, who had significant amounts of foreign assets that didn't report them, and yet they provided financial information under penalty of perjury and executed a contract with the United States and offering compromise. So those cases are being developed now to be referred over to criminal investigation.
Yep. No, Darren, on that note, I want to say something. There are a lot of people, and you know this, and in fact, I think you and I may have even spoken on this in Las Vegas. Most people think of tax evasion, right, as the return with either bogus deductions or missing income. What a lot of people do not understand, but we're seeing an uptick in enforcement, is evasion of payment, where you provide a false financial, whether it's in the uncollectible installment, 433A and B, or the offer arena, where a taxpayer either fails to disclose assets or knowingly, I think, significantly materially understates or anything like that. They've actually committed a crime. And there are a lot of practitioners and especially taxpayers who don't seem to appreciate that they've committed a crime, right? By submitting a financial where they've left stuff off. And I have a former client that did that. We fired him when we found out. He was just prosecuted and pled guilty. Provided a false 433. He left off significant assets that he did not disclose to us. So I'm actually going to throw in my 2 cents and urge anyone listening to this. When you're doing a collection case, remind your clients it's no different than an audit. It's no different than preparing the return. That's financial that goes in. This is not a time to start playing games. That you are submitting a document to the government that you're asking the government to rely upon, and your whole deal is based on that. And it is a crime if it's false.
Yeah, and look, just on a personal side, I have to sleep at night. I've been doing this for 33 years. I've met with taxpayers. I was a revenue officer. I've referred cases for fraud. I've seized property. I've had to see people eye to eye. I've had a taxpayer I investigated commit suicide. I remember that every single day. Nobody who works here wakes up in the morning and wants to seize property or see people put in jail. That's not our goal. Our goal is to fund the country. And it's really unfortunate, as far as we're willing to go to help people, if they dig a hole for themselves by simply not telling us the truth. We're trying to help you, and the worst thing you can do is lie to us, because we don't come out and start with enforcement. We start with trying to help you. So we'll meet you, we'll halfway, we'll go even beyond that now, but just tell the truth. Eric, there's another area I know it's important to you, and we'll probably talk about it more as this podcast goes on, employment taxes, but something the Office of Fraud Enforcement is helping to spearhead with field collection is also important for your clients to hear, because this is new. So trust fund penalty cases. So when we can't collect from the individual officers, we may pursue a suit for injunctive relief. There may be a fraud referral. There may be a seizure. Many of those taxpayers file bankruptcy or they're closed as a hardship. This is something new we're doing. This is important. We are now training our revenue officers and working in collaboration with the Office of Fraud Enforcement and examination with the lawns people, where we have trust fund cases where the individual officers can be shown to have benefited personally from the payroll taxes they stole, and they did not report that as income on their 1040. We are creating referrals to go over to examination to develop a civil fraud penalty against those individuals, and potentially that could be tax evasion as well. So heads up on that. That's not something we're planning to do 2 years from now. It's happening right now.
So Darren, so where you've got cases, right, the business fails, all right, or at least it's unable to quickly repay the payroll tax. So now there's this liability. Normally, as you know, the trust fund investigation and potential assessments will come out. Now, what we normally see, the cases that go criminal are cases where you have owners with a lifestyle, where we have recidivism, right? This is not their first time to the rodeo. In other words, we have a pattern of effectively stealing the government's money to fund themselves. So I'm a little unclear what makes this different. It sounds like what you're saying is maybe these aren't cases that are completely criminal, but we feel that there's been an abuse. Or is it more just trying to better train the field to recognize what I always think of as these 3 or 4 kind of traits, or these signs where this is really fraud. But more than that, it's what it comes down to. It's not that these people couldn't pay the payroll taxes; they just didn't feel like it. And they effectively abused the system and stole the government's money. I'm a little unclear if this is really something new, or is it more just helping them focus on this? Because there aren't, first of all, you and Caroline, when Caroline Cirolo was the acting assistant attorney general, you guys spoke about this at Mohegan Sun at our New England Rep Conference, and really put payroll enforcement back on the radar. Because prior to that, you almost never saw a payroll case go criminal. Mm-hmm. And now, if people aren't, they should go sign up for the DOJ newsletter. I would say at least once a week. I would almost say daily, but I know it's not daily. But at least once a week, employment taxes are in those announcements. DOJ and IRS CI have got payroll taxes on their radar screen. And you and Caroline really had a lot to do with that. So is what you're describing now more of a getting them to focus, or is it actually something really new?
It's something new. So I'm a revenue officer, Eric, and I can tell you I was not trained back in the 1980s to take an employment tax case and develop an examination referral for a civil fraud penalty against an individual officer. I was trained to investigate for responsibility and willfulness, and if the business couldn't pay, to assert a trust fund penalty against those found to be responsible and willful. And from time to time, you'd refer a case for fraud if CI had the bandwidth to take those employment tax cases. So what's completely new here in the history, I think, of the revenue officer position is we are training our employees, because CI, look, there's over 500,000 941 tax cases available for ROs to work right now. Over 500,000.
Wow.
A smaller percentage, but a big number are egregiously working those. I mean, CI cannot take every single one of those cases. So with that in mind, and I think we all agree it's potentially a crime when you steal those payroll taxes and fill out a 941 and say you made deposits you didn't, right? And so forth. So if we train our employees to look beyond the 433B, the ability of the business to pay, and look at the individuals involved. So CI is not getting the case for criminal prosecution, and we're not pursuing a suit for injunctive relief, but it's still an egregious case. We can increase our enforcement bandwidth to try to deter noncompliance, Eric, by determining, did the individual officer that we determined to be willful and responsible, did they benefit from that money? Did they use it to enrich themselves? And if they did it show up as income on their 1040? If it did not, then then the 75% civil fraud penalty is one of the avenues to pursue, or we'll refer it over to exam. But the Office of Fraud Enforcement is going to be integral in working, those fraud advisors working with the revenue officer on further developing, adding that new possibility to the employment tax investigations ROs revenue officers conduct.
Very interesting.
And just one last area I want to comment on about the Office of Fraud Enforcement, because again, it stood up just in March. They're working closely with our compliance counterparts on offshore initiatives. For instance, they will review cases to see if they meet the criteria, and if not, they're going to determine the applicability for civil fraud penalties and whether the case should be referred to criminal investigation for criminal fraud. And they're also going to work with our field agents whenever they identify potential fraud on those international cases, for instance, in issuing international summonses and any other methods to uncover potentially unreported income from those international sources. They're also, as I said a little while ago, they're paying close attention to professional enablers. And this is important. They're very involved in that. So they're placing emphasis on identifying these unscrupulous tax preparers and promoters. They're going to be helping revenue officers and revenue agents in their cases to identify potential fraudulent patterns of abuse. For instance, helping in cases against fraudulent promoters of schemes like the Form 7200 I mentioned, and conservation easements as well. They're also going to be recommending referrals either to CI or to the Abusive Transactions Division for potential injunctions to shut those promoters down. So the bottom line is, you asked what's different about the Office of Fraud Enforcement from the old National Fraud Program. That's a heck of a lot. And honestly, I can't imagine a worse time in history to be a tax criminal. I just can't.
Oh, and listen, the ability to hide from the government is much more difficult to do. Again, better use of data, analytics, the ability to match information. No, Darren, I absolutely agree. The to flip back to civil, right? Now, so we're recording this now. We're past July 15th. Mm-hmm. So are we going to suddenly start seeing levies every single day? Are liens going to start raining down? I mean, how are you guys going to deal with, you to help taxpayers, you sort of took a pause on enforcement, right? Through July 15th. Now that we're past July 15th, what can we expect to see on the civil enforcement side?
Okay. Wow, Eric, so you asked, will it rain levies? No. No, you can save your umbrella. As the commissioner pointed out earlier this week, our enforcement will begin gradually, and it won't start. I think you used the term like flipping a switch. It's not. So let me get into specifics, and there's a bunch here. So for your audience, Eric, I'm going to cover where we are with enforcement and post July 15th after the Taxpayer First initiative and all areas of collection alternatives. So beginning July 16th, you need to resume making your installment payments, and taxpayers with a direct debit agreement should have informed their bank to allow those debits to resume before that next payment's due. If you had a pending, this is important, a pending offering compromise, you need to provide any requested additional information to support that pending OIC, because after July 15th, if they fail to do that, the pending OIC can once again be closed without the taxpayer's consent if that requested information doesn't come in. Now let's talk about accepted offers. Payments on accepted offers, they had a pause there too, right? They'll need to be caught up. So you can contact the monitoring OIC unit, or MOIC, and you can ask for up to 120 days to catch up on those skipped payments. If your situation has changed and you can no longer make the payments you agreed to in that offer, this is technical. I know the audience is sophisticated enough, people like you, Eric, to do this. You can submit an offer to compromise your existing offer.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In fact, I didn't discover that until Sarah Neal, who I think you know, Sarah. She's at Cape Sokol in St. Louis, and Sarah and I were talking about a case. And I always discover new things whenever I go digging into the IRM. And so we were going through, and you can, Darren, as you just said, and for people listening who don't realize this, you can compromise a compromise. Generally speaking, my advice has been when the client has had a permanent change. It's not like, gee, our income's down this month. It's where you've had a permanent change, and certainly failed businesses, anything like that out of the coronavirus would certainly qualify. You can submit updated financials and have the government effectively say, look, here's what we agreed to the compromise, but in light of your new situation, and you can effectively modify that.
Uh-huh.
Yep, no, absolutely. It's a great thing to point out to people who did not realize that.
Yeah, and I've spoken to some other audiences over the past 7 days, Eric, and there's a concern about how flexible we'll be. Let me just say this on the record. I personally have, in a memo I sent out July the 6th, Paul Mamo, Director of Collection, Fred Schindler, Director of Headquarters Collection, and Guadalupe Ortiz, the Director of the OIC program. We've all asked our OIC staff to be as flexible as possible to avoid defaulting offers. So if your offer is still pending, the taxpayer should resume those required payments now since July 15th, right? The IRS is going to amend the taxpayer's offer to allow them to pay any skipped payments at the end of the offer period if the offer is accepted. So that's about pending offers. So if you had a pending offer and you skip payments, we'll simply adjust your offer in compromise and add those payments later, but we won't default it. Let me get into the enforcement things now. Specifically you wanted to talk about. So you've heard, or you've assumed there was a mail backlog. It's real. It was big, right? So while we wait for the mail and the notice backlogs to get cleared out, automated programs are going to remain idle. So let me talk about the specific automated programs, because in the past, these things have triggered clients coming to you for help. So the programs that are going to remain idle include the automated levy programs, the federal, specifically the Federal Payment Levy Program, or FIPLA, the State Income Tax Levy Program, the Municipal Income Tax Levy Program, and also the Alaska Permanent Fund Dividend Program. These will not be issued during this time, right? So those are paused. Also, routine, the ACS systemic levies, those aren't going to be issued. Also, any new certifications to the Department of State, which is going to impact a client's ability to receive a new or renewed passport, right? That's remaining suspended at the moment. Now we're going to restart those programs, but we're going to do it on a program by program basis when we determine it's the appropriate time. And I mentioned a half hour ago or 20 minutes ago or so, I think that appropriate is critical. And here is where it's really critical. We are not there yet. Now is not the appropriate time. But at some point it will be. And we will give advance notice before we start doing that when it's the appropriate time. But I believe, Eric, it's going to be on a program by program basis. The field has the same issue with the backlog. So we're getting people into the offices to go through mail and things are backed up. And I know you, the practitioners, are concerned, well, I sent something in March or April, and if it's buried in a lot of mail in a field office, will the revenue officer working with me just immediately, I think you said brain levies, right? That's not going to happen in the field either. So field collection is going to continue to, they're going to continue to try to get caught up with that backlog. They're going to only initiate a tax lien in exigent circumstances when there's really some bad behavior and they need to get territory manager, the senior manager level approval. ACS, by the way, is also not going to be issuing tax liens in any circumstance at all. And they're going to be foregoing them when it comes to installment agreements and 53s or uncollectible cases. So I'll say that again, ACS is not going to be filing liens in any circumstances for the time being, including when taxpayers get installment agreements or they're declared a hardship. This is new. You may have heard about it, so I'll confirm it's true. We have a temporary program in place. We are no longer asking taxpayers to provide us a financial statement if their balance due is below $250,000. That's ACS only.
Yep.
If you can pay within the remaining time on the collection statute expiration date, or the CSED, and you owe less than $250,000, we will not require you to give us a financial statement. It's temporary. It's an extraordinary opportunity for us to help struggling taxpayers right now. We began it in March, and it's designed to be in place for a year, but we'll play it by ear and see if it's extended.
Now, Darren,
Yep,
I happen to agree with you. It's a fantastic opportunity for people who want to just get a payment arrangement, not have to do all the financials and all that. What I will tell you is two things. One, what we're finding when we call ACS, there are still a lot of people that don't seem to know about this. So we're actually having to point them. And it's not in the IRM. It's like on the Freedom of Information Act page. So it's kind of in an odd place. So one is there is a little bit of an educational aspect where we have to point them to it and they have to put us on hold. They have to go figure it out. But the other thing is they're coming back with it's 72 months or CSED, whichever is less. And that's not our reading of it. Our reading is CSED. And so we've had a little bit of battling with some of the ACS folks who are claiming it's 72 months or CSED, whichever is less, not just CSED. So can you clarify, is that the rule, 72 months or CSED, whichever is less, or is it the CSED? Because our reading of it is the CSED.
Yeah, I'll have to get back with headquarters collection on that and get that clarified, Eric, but I believe it's if they can pay within the life of the statute.
That's our reading of it. The last thing, Darren, I wanted to, and this is more a suggestion, is, the revenue officers are by far your most effective collection force. And my understanding is there's a fairly significant backlog of cases waiting to be assigned to the field. There are only so many cases, as you know, you were an RO. There's only so many cases an RO can handle. Have you considered the idea of rolling the 250 out to the field? Or, Darren, if you don't really love that idea, and I understand why, how about, remember the expanded? Remember you did a pilot program, then it became permanent. It was 100,000 over 84 months. And this is my 2 cents for you to consider, the idea of rolling that out to the field, because we have like a TFRP case is now closed. It's 70 grand, 80 grand. They can't pay down below 50. And now we're in an argument back and forth over allowable standards versus actual. It always struck me that when the 100,000 over 84 months at the time was extremely helpful for us to get people in, get them set up quickly, cheaply. They don't have to pay a lot of legal fees. We don't have to do the whole 433. I might suggest is one of the things that you guys could consider at this time is maybe expanding the field IA streamlined from 50, which I think it's still now at 50 at 72 months, to roll that to the 184 like you had done for ACS, or 84 months or the CSET, whichever is less, because that is extremely helpful. And I think it would help us get rid of a lot of the cases, because we tend to get a lot of people in that 70, 80, 90, $100,000 range, but they just don't have the means to pay down below the 50 to get into the streamlined. Just my 2 cents.
So no, your 2 cents will go very far, Eric. So there's a small team. We just started meeting last Friday, and the commissioner asked us to look for all other ways that we might be able to use our collection programs to help people going through tough times. So it's a blank canvas. So what you just suggested, yeah, those are things we can consider. But let me go specifically to your question about, is the field different with the 250,000? It is, and let me explain to your audience why. So taxpayers who file their returns, typically the vast majority pay what they owe, and some taxpayers they don't. They need to get a notice, but they pay an incredibly high number of them, and a smaller number need to get subsequent notices, and they work with ACS. Cases that go to the field generally have been through all of those steps. They haven't complied. They haven't paid. They haven't provided information. Some cases are data scientists, PhDs even, who filter and look at inventory, can see that a case has so much complexity and potential risk to it that it goes straight to the field. It doesn't go to ACS. So the field inventory is different. It doesn't matter what you owe in the field. That's why the procedures are different. It requires civil investigation, eyes on the ground, an interview, etc. So that said, are we open to being more flexible even in the field? Absolutely, yes, with an exclamation point, but we're not there yet to be specific, and you won't have to wait too long to know what those additional flexibilities are, because I assure you we're working quickly, because the time is now, right, to help people in the coronavirus pandemic. So we're not going to study something for several months and nothing happens. We're going to study something for several days and weeks, and we're going to try to get something out quickly, which is consistent with all the other changes you've seen. One of them I didn't mention, Eric, installment agreements. So if you didn't make payments on your installment agreement, we've allowed you to make up for those payments. But in addition to that, if you filed a tax return with a balance due, we're not defaulting your installment agreement. We're looking at whether, given the payment amount that you have for your installment agreement, if adding that new period will allow you to pay within the life of the CSED, we're simply adding that new period, and we're not defaulting your installment agreement. That means you don't have to worry about a wait time with the IRS to get your installment agreement reinstated and add a period. We're just doing that for you to help you continue to make your payments. So
Darren, I got to tell you, that's huge. Because we're getting calls about that. I was in a payment plan. I'm not going to be able to pay off the 20,000, 15,000, whatever I'm still going to owe. Are they going to default me? And what we've actually been advising people before I knew that was, you know what, call and ask. I said, because what we have found, even in the past, sometimes they can be a little flexible. And again, if it's well within CSED, whatever, they've actually just rolled it in and calculated a new payment and just reset them up again. So I've always found that helpful. That is going to be extremely helpful for people.
Yeah. So let me tell your audience what resumption of enforcement will look like in the field. All right. I mentioned the campuses and things being on pause. I want to preface these comments, though, with letting your audience know that revenue officers and supervisory revenue officers, and even their field director, Hank Key, these are decent people. I mean, they're acutely aware of how tough it is out there. And I'm sure they've seen firsthand that business owners that have had to reduce their operations or even shut down during the pandemic. And like me, like you, Eric, like all of your audience, we have friends, family, we've got neighbors that are struggling with the loss of a job or or a tight budget because their hours are limited. Those employees, the people I just mentioned, I know them. I know most of them. And common sense and decency and an empathy for others, their fellow citizens, that's going to be a key to what's driving them in the weeks ahead. I issued a memo, as I mentioned, on July the 6th, and the collection leadership have also issued similar communications since that, encouraging and authorizing greater flexibility. We know about the mail backlogs. It's going to take a while to get through them. Our employees are going to ask you, your clients, if something was mailed to us during the period of office closings, and if you say there was, we're going to give them the benefit of the doubt. We will not be returning to the office as usual, though, so getting to the office to pick up items might still be delayed some, so that has to be factored in. But we've asked all of our revenue officers to consider each taxpayer's potential impact from the coronavirus and to follow soft contact procedures. You're a technical crowd, so I'll just toss out an IRM section. Those soft procedures, that's the actual term, are found in 5.1.12. 5.1.12 of the Internal Revenue Manual. And they're going to consult that before they take any enforcement action. So, no, we are not returning to status quo. It's not going to rain levies from revenue officers either, but we are getting back to business now, and we're going to do it in a smart and compassionate way. As far as being in the field, are you going to see people knocking on your door now? Until further notice, we're going to continue to maximize telework, and remote contact between employees and taxpayers is going to be the order of the day for the vast majority. Face-to-face or public contact and field activities, it's only going to happen in exceptional cases. They're not going to be routine or regularly occurring. It's going to have territory manager approval before they go out in the field. Let me give you some examples. And I mentioned these before already. They can only happen in the field, right? Jeopardy levies, jeopardy seizures, protecting a short statute, taxpayers placing their assets beyond the reach of the government. This is a key one. It's important for ROs, right? Continuing pyramiding of employment taxes. And also, if you, the power of attorney or enrolled agent, if you request revenue officer face-to-face contact, and that revenue officer and manager agree that a field contact will advance the progress of the case, there could be field contact, observing, again, CDC guidelines and so forth, social distancing. If at all possible, though, we're going to seek to avoid contact at the taxpayer's residence or the representative's business, recognizing the need for social distancing. And we're also going to be considering if the contact could be conducted at an IRS facility where we have plexiglass barriers, and we're seeing more and more of that opportunity become available in the weeks ahead. On our efforts at developing fraud, suits for injunctions, suits to foreclose, suits to reduce a lien to a judgment, levies and seizures, and trust fund penalties, that activity will proceed in appropriate cases. However, I want to say that we're going to use extreme sensitivity and look at each taxpayer's personal circumstances before we do any of that. I mean, we know that Americans and their businesses are struggling. I only have to drive around my own neighborhood where I live here in Northern Virginia to see how many businesses still aren't open or they've got limited operating. I do want to say this, though. If you have past due returns, if your clients do, please file them. It's going to save you money. It's frustrating. I mean, Eric, I see a lot of taxpayers that haven't filed, and when you ask them why they didn't file, they say, "Well, I was afraid to file a return with the IRS because I can't afford to pay yet."
Right.
The result is they file late and they owe taxes and a whole bunch of penalties that they could have avoided. But there are other taxpayers, quite a few of them, with significant amounts of income, and they haven't filed, and they should know better. We know who you are. That's the message for them. We know who you are. You are a priority. So if you represent one of these clients, please urge them to file their return, because if they don't, one of a number of things is going to happen. We're going to file for them. There'll be a significant tax liability if we do. If there are badges of fraud, and there are, I've seen these cases, we're working on moving your cases over to exam or CI for a significant audit activity, a civil fraud penalty, or possible prosecution. And those cases are moving as we speak. and CI will start to see those cases this year, in the coming weeks, next couple of months even. If your behavior is not egregious, though, if you're working with us, if you're trying to resolve the problem, enforcement should not happen. It's a last resort. Enforcement's never our first resort. Just wanted to make sure that everybody was aware there's an enforcement message, but it's very tailored to taxpayers who don't want to try to help us resolve the situation. And in every case, we're going to try to do that. But if you're one of those taxpayers who's not, just because there's a pandemic does not mean that there won't be any enforcement, because there has been and there will.
Yeah, no, Darren, and my comments on the non-filer, for those people listening, there are a couple things. One, I agree 100%. If you're like wavering on filing the 19, for instance, save the 25% failure to file penalty right out of the gate. Just get the return in and deal with it. I mean, you've heard Darren, say, you may be uncollectible. Maybe you can do an offer in compromise. But first of all, without compliance, there is no deal. Right? You cannot do an offer without being in compliance. You can't get an installment agreement without being in compliance. All right. So A. B, if you are somebody who has not, and we've seen a couple of these, who has not filed because of prior bad acts. And Darren, I'll just say this. We've got people who've now come to us and said, I paid everybody in cash. I don't have records. I don't even know who they are. I can't file my returns. And so they're like in vapor lock. I just want to throw out there is a voluntary disclosure program. And in fact, to me, in my mind, it's the only way to deal with that. IRS there will be no criminal referral. If they have not found out about you, you can come in and clean this up and sleep at night. All right. You'd be amazed how much IRS wants you to come in. All right. And there will be no criminal referral. We can sort it out and again, put it behind you. All right. So if you're somebody or you have clients that are in that boat, do look at the IRS has always had a very robust domestic voluntary disclosure. People have heard about the international and the foreign bank account one. There's a domestic one, and we have about 7 of these pending now, more than I've ever had before, from people that are coming in and want to clean up this past bad behavior and move forward. You can do that. The government, as much as Darren and I have been talking about fraud and fraud referrals, you can avoid all of that if you come in voluntarily. All right. So Darren, with all of this going on, what do your hiring efforts look like? Because I'm sure the coronavirus has hampered that as well. What can we look for as far as hiring?
So we have had an extraordinary time hiring, but we've really had to improvise, right? Because the offices are closed, and we've had to do it virtually. So let me get specific to collection, for instance, ACS. So look, let me just start by saying this. If you've worked a collection case, nothing could be more frustrating than you get a notice in the mail from the IRS that warns of enforcement and invites you to call us, and then we don't answer your call, or there's a very long wait for you to answer the call. And that's real. I know it's real. And we've been working really hard to address that. Because we should answer those calls, but it's been a resource issue. We got enough phone calls prior to the pandemic for 5,000 employees, but during the first quarter, fiscal year 20, we were down to 1,900 at one point. So just do the math there, and our ability to answer those calls was severely hampered. So a number of things to improve that level of service. One was, to go to your question, Eric, hiring. We ensured the success of that hiring by doing an awful lot of recruiting earlier this year, before offices were closed, college visits, job fairs, working with unemployment offices, just to name a few. And we had an overwhelming number of applicants. But due to COVID-19 and evacuating the offices in March, we had to quickly reassess how are we going to onboard and train people and ensure that we can still provide customer service. So we quickly converted our onboarding process and training into a virtual environment, and ensuring more of our staff was telework ready. And IT, I can't say enough about Nancy Seeger and the IT team, and our operations support and small business, Anita Hill's staff, and making almost miracles happen in ensuring that more of our staff was telework ready, providing laptops, monitors, headsets. Since the onset of the pandemic, we were able to virtually onboard several hundred new ACS CRs, and that's across all of our 19 sites. This is an important statistic. Prior to the pandemic, so if you went back to February or March, 5% of our ACS staff were telework ready. Today, 75% in all of our ACS call sites are telework ready. So our workforce grew from about 1,900 in November to 2,889 as of June 30th. And I wanted to share that specific number with you because here's the good news. We are still hiring, literally right now. So we're getting more of those employees safely back into our campus sites, observing all the safety protocols to resolve those backlogs of mail and get notices out. They're answering calls about notices, and they're even taking many calls about the economic impact payments. Many of these same employees have done double duty by making masks and other community service activities, in their neighborhoods with charitable organizations. I couldn't be more proud of them. But hiring has been a bright spot in this pandemic, Eric. We have added a heck of a lot of people to our collection campus operations.
And I, for one, appreciate that. And no joking aside, it is a customer. It is very frustrating for taxpayers who cannot get through. What I always find interesting is when people with problems say, they should cut the IRS and all this stuff, and then they complain that they can't get help.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, well, who do you think is going to help you? No, it's a little crazy. But so that the hiring is good news. One thing I also wanted to ask you, and this is a personal thing. As I mentioned earlier, you and Caroline, I in my mind, really led the charge to make payroll tax enforcement a priority. Do you think we can assume that is going to continue?
Absolutely, yes. Our focus on the egregious employment tax violators continued through the Taxpayer First initiative, and it's going to continue. We're going to continue to pursue it since the TFI, or Taxpayer First initiative, expired. You mentioned Caroline. So since 2015, IRS bill collection, the civil enforcement advice and support operations, we use the acronym CISO, the advisors basically, our think tank embedded, our small business counsel, the Office of Fraud Enforcement, Criminal Investigation, and the DOJ Tax Division that you referred to have put a lot of emphasis on egregious employment tax noncompliance with some really impressive success to talk about. Over the past 5 years, let me just tell you what it involved. It increased training and early educational interaction with businesses. That's real important. The first thing we did was not go out and enforce. It was educate taxpayers. We visited them before they owed because we knew that they were falling behind based on our analytics. So in our first year, we did a lot of those. We had record timely trust fund penalty investigations. If you look back in time prior to the pandemic and went back 4 years, for 4 years in a row, over 90% of all the assigned business cases had the trust fund investigation already finished. So those were records. We increased our civil suits, civil injunctions on businesses, as well as fraud referrals. Revenue officers are the single largest source of fraud referrals accepted by CI, and employment tax referrals, if you're curious, are the single largest component of them. You referred to that earlier, Eric.
Yep. We
We also had greater publicity and awareness, which led us to realize a reduction in the past due employment taxes owed to the IRS by over $5.6 billion, with a B, billion dollars. That's the most significant reduction in the last 13 years. This is important. This is,
Yep.
The commissioner talks a lot about, we all do, about how 96% of America's revenue is collected through the IRS, but over 70% of that 96% of that revenue, it comes from those withheld taxes. So given that, and the IRS's ability to fund the nation, has rarely been more important than it is right now. And employment tax compliance is going to continue to be a significant risk area that we're responsible for mitigating. But that said, I do want to couch it with this. We recognize most Americans work for a small business. You only have to read the paper, turn on the news, or as I just pointed out, drive around your own community to see how many businesses are closed or severely limited. How do we help them stay in business? How do we help them continue to employ our fellow citizens? These are really tough times, and that is our ultimate goal, to keep them in business. Unfortunately, though, believe it or not, there are employers whose continued non-compliance is so egregious, it's going to have to be met with enforcement. And that's going to include levies, liens, seizures, trust fund penalties, suits, and fraud referrals. And as I mentioned earlier, Eric, pursuing civil fraud penalties, perhaps on those individuals that didn't report the money they stole on their 1040. But beyond those types of employers, we're going to be keeping in mind the taxpayers' posture working with us to stay current, while honoring all the flexibilities that they're afforded under the CARES Act, which of course allows them to defer some of their deposits until December 2021 and 2022. That has to be a factor now, and that's new, right? That's going to add a new complexity to revenue officer trust fund investigations. That's going to have to be a factor in determining responsibility and willfulness. Have they done their best to remain compliant? So, yeah, that's important. I mentioned $500,000. If you want this kind of specific number, I'll ballpark it. The number of past due employment tax cases available for revenue officers to work is nearly 530,000.
Wow.
It's a big number.
Oh, yeah. So, Darren, out of curiosity, I mean, can you let us know, what is morale like inside the IRS?
Honestly, it's so good.
I was going to say that's kind of that's like saying, how's everyone in New Jersey feeling? I mean, it's
well, all right, let me just talk from the heart to you here. And I'm not shining anybody on here. I mean, it's so good, it's striking. I mean, I really mean that. I grew up in this organization. Over 30 years I've been here. And the best way to instill morale in our workforce, the IRS workforce, is to galvanize them behind our mission. And I don't mean that in a wordy way, like reading the mission, but in a real tangible and gritty understanding of what we do and what it means. I mentioned 96% a second ago. Their work, how do you convince your employees? I talked about making believers, right? We have convinced our employees. They know that their work results in 96% of the funds in the Treasury. Those are the funds. Those are the funds that pay for all America does and it can do. And without them, these employees at IRS, they know it can't happen. So when they read the news or they hear a story from a friend about how the government helped them with an economic impact payment or an employer tax credit, or even the amazing stuff you see from the Centers for Disease Control, National Institutes of Health, and a host of others that are fighting the pandemic, all of those things are paid for with that 96%. That number has to mean something to them, and we make sure of that. We want them to see themselves as part of the solution, funding America. And Eric, I'll share one story with you from a couple of months ago that really tells you how motivated our workforce is. One of my employees in collection, and unfortunately became ill from coronavirus. He was so ill, he was moved to the intensive care unit, and he was on a ventilator. His managers let me know. That's how I found out about it. And I called his wife to offer my support and to ask if there's anything I can do, but I ended up not reaching anybody, and I had to leave a message. The next day, my phone's ringing, and it's my employee. He's calling me from the intensive care unit, and he's telling me that he's going to be okay, and he was apologizing. He was sorry he didn't get my call the preceding day, and that he was worried I had to worry about him overnight. And he was telling me he hoped to be back in a regular hospital room in the next day or two. A week later, he's home, and now he's already back at work. But think about that. He's the kind of person that works for the IRS. And unfortunately, even frankly, I'm going to do it today. I've written too many condolences, and I've had to call too many loved ones. and I'm sure you've felt this and seen this too, all of you out there listening. I don't think any of us on this call have not been affected by this, by the coronavirus. Our message to you is this: we have your back at the IRS. We will raise the revenue, and the country will get better. We'll come back to work soon, whatever soon is, and we'll be an even stronger team. And we're going to be serving you better than ever. I mean, thanks to the technology that I talked about a moment ago, our rapid expansion of telework and all those other innovations, getting back to normal is probably not going to take as long because we're doing it differently. And that's in large part because our remote efforts are such a big part of that. And I know Commissioner Reddick, who all of you know, and all the agency's senior leaders are impressed by the kind of resolve I just described with that employee and the dedication. And that's our entire workforce. They know why they're here. They know what 96% means for them. And this is their life's work. I think morale's high.
No, it certainly sounds like it. So listen, Darren, before I ask my last question, for those people listening to this who may want to reach out to you, how best can they connect with you?
So I think through the stakeholder liaison, this allows us to document and track. So, when I speak at public events, Eric, like yours, I provide my office number, and I get a reasonable number of calls, but it's manageable. But with me being in meetings most of the day, it may take me days to get back with you, and I apologize. I have to admit, sometimes I miss a call or two, and that's incredibly important to me because somebody's life's at stake, their financial life at a minimum, right? I shouldn't not return your message. So if you work through the stakeholder liaisons, that'll make sure it doesn't get dropped and me or somebody on my staff does reach out to you.
All right, and you know what? I'll put a link to the stakeholder liaison page. There are phone numbers there. I'll put that in the description of the podcast. So, Darren, to wrap up, look, I mean, first of all, I'm of course, because I'm observing every day, very impressed with what IRS has done. I mean, between the pandemic and, revamping enforcement and now the distance, work and all that. If you could just summarize the one message that you would want practitioners and taxpayers to hear, what would it be?
Who are you? I know it's easy for people to think of, IRS as that acronym and it's this thing, but we shop at the same grocery stores. Our kids go to the same schools. We've lost loved ones. We have loved ones that are sick. We have elderly parents, I do, that we can't visit in a nursing home. This is terrible. But we're stronger and we're getting through it together. A lot of the aid that's going to happen, it's going to get America healthy again, comes from what we do at the IRS. And I'll give two messages. Here's the second one, Eric. Beyond we're all in this together. Come on. I mean, we're a very successful agency, but we can't do this alone. Throughout history, the IRS has only been successful because the tax professional community is out there to help get our message out like you're doing right now and to help taxpayers understand how to comply with the tax law. So that 96%, it's your number too. So thank you.
No, Darren, listen, thank you. And thank you for joining me today. And thank all of you who are listening to this. Darren, listen, keep up the good work. I'm very happy with, because again, we deal with you and you guys and ladies every day. And the IRS, I would almost say, didn't miss a beat. It was a little tough to get through to people initially, but we've been working cases, and the mail has been an issue, but it has still been a great agency to work through, even with everything going on. And as hopefully the country starts getting back to normal, that'll continue. I think the changes and the stuff that you're doing is really helpful. And we're going to keep looking for the announcements to keep coming out about the programs that you've been talking about. And I truthfully, everyone should appreciate the amount of effort that you're going into to think through how to do your job and yet help taxpayers right now who are suffering. Because there's a lot of a lot of people view the IRS as cold and heartless, and that is just not the case. And so, again, thank you both for coming on today and all your efforts. And thank you all for listening. And until next week, thanks for listening to the Tax Rep Network podcast. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.